Um, Thank you. First of all, thank you, Celia, for inviting me to introduce Sky Films and for putting together a beautiful program. Now I learned that also with the help of your assistant. So thank you also for that person that I haven't met. And thank you to all the team of Kunstnernes Hus, I hope I pronounced that right, for hosting me. And thank you, everybody who is here tonight. It's wonderful to see you all there. So, hello. I'll start just doing a small land acknowledgement to tell you where I am. I am in the ancestral home of the Seneca people, also known as the Grey Hill people and keepers of the Western Door of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which is in between the New York state and also partly Canada. And the city where I am is now known as Rochester, and it has been the home of many indigenous people still today. I also want to read a small statement by Ojibwe. It was written by Ojibwe filmmaker Adam Khalil, which explains what it is a territorial acknowledgement and how to think about it. And I really like to share his words. So, and I'm reading it. A territorial acknowledgement can demonstrate a coming to awareness and provoke thought and reflection, all of which are essential in beginning to establish healthy reciprocal relations. It can become part of living out our apologies for the historical reality of settler colonialism and its ongoing legacy and continued attack on people and land. It is an important practice that we understand must fundamentally occur on the levels of epistemology and culture. And I'm going to start with some words written by Sky from his recent collection of poems, Perfidia, which was published in 2020. So I just extracted a little section of it, and I think you have in your handout also the text. So what I'm going to share with you in the introduction is a mix between what I wrote and also some personal thoughts that I kind of wanted to add to the introduction. So I'll start reading this small section of his poetry. Back to Castile and Aragon, where you don't think of me anymore. You've neglected our pain. You've ignored our children. You've discharged our dead. Back to King Louis, because you are the same. You've tasseled our hair and torn at our trust and pushed us away and sold us out. Back to King George. You've taken our things and won't give them back. You came and you took, and you made promises that sing and gave us a tongue bitter in taste, parched and thirsty. Broad Europe, you remain over there. You've forgotten my mother, my father, and my brother and sister, who mourn every day. But we can't forget you, as your violent emissaries remain. Sky and I met in around 2014 at the Ann Arbor Film Festival when he was still an MFA student at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. At that point, we shared a cigarette by the fire. And since then, we had a relationship that involved the screenings, Zoom talks, travels together, and many, many friend gatherings. I start with this point because it reflects our relationship beyond the limits of the present, and not just our personal relationship, but also bigger relationships that go through history that reflects on our personal relationships as well, me being from Galicia, Spain, and what it means that for people who lives here and who've been here before me. I choose also a poem because that's, I think, one of the major ways of expression from Sky. Poetry is able to capture more precisely emotional life, liberating language from the linear and transparent use of language like Trinity Minha says. Hopinka uses images and sounds like poets use words because each has a set of meanings and rhythms of its own within the world that each of them evokes. Poetry reveals something inherently inexpressive, something that is emotionally there, but intellectually unable to be processed. By bringing together the voices that have been torn apart by colonization, poetry becomes a form of autonomous history in Hopinka's practice, a tool to remember indigenous shared past and contemporary experiences of indigeneity. Through his writing, his artist books, and his films, Sky has been cultivating an ongoing historical speculation that points to the impossibility of telling the history of colonialism. His unique methodology of combining mythology, poetry, and everydayness is a radical historical intervention to document the stories of those who have been erased, forgotten, or ignored. His films are not about compiling stories, but about sharing a moment. So now he's going to be sharing a moment with you with each of his films. Like a puzzle, they are constructed with fragmented, superimposed images, text, and sound. Landscapes in Hopinka's films are glances of seas, forests, paths, source, cliffs, bridges, skies, and roads, without any precise information or the whereabouts. Each slice of the landscape contains memories of those who were there before Hopinka and his camera, and those who are still around. These stories might be audible through narrations, contained in the inflection of language itself, or expressed directly through the camera as a visual construction. Friendship, family, and travel are in his films opportunities to reflect on colonialism and what it means to be an indigenous person in North America. The cultural implications of language and its interpersonal qualities are a constant in Hopinka's work. One of the works that you will see tonight, Wawa, which is from 2014 and is his earliest piece of work, centers around his experiences while learning and teaching Chino Wawa, as Celia mentioned at the beginning, a language from the lower area of the Columbia River Basin in the Pacific Northwest of North America. In contrast with the static standardized concept of grammar, the political conditions of its speaker community are in constant movement because it is being activated by individual speakers. Then you will see also Visions of an Island, that it was done in 2016. In that film, Hopinka further develops what he sees as the vital relationship between the land and language, with a scene where an Unangam Tunu elder describes the landscape of St. Paul, Alaska. Hopinka is a visitor, an outsider in St. Paul. He maintains the distance with his hosts while experiencing the landscape and hearing about the landscape. The film is part of Hopinka's praxis of what cinema could be. It's no longer a question of talking about or talking for a community, but rather of a shared space with boundaries. By being nearby his subjects without occupying their place, he puts into perspective political questions around indigenous representation. In I'll Remember You As You Were, Not As What You'll Become, which is another film you'll see tonight from 2016, Hopinka connects anthropological recollections of the Ho-Chunk nation with the landscape and the work of Chemehuevi and Anishinaabe poet Diane Barnes. He includes calligrams, which are text in which the design and layout creates a visual image that incorporate excerpts by white anthropologist Paul Radin and his informant Jasper Blow-Snake about the Ho-Chunk belief in reincarnation, shaped as an earthen effigy mound built by his own tribe. These large structures are visible from the sky and have historically housed human remains and served as markers denoting territory and boundaries. By reshaping the Western anthropological text that describes his tribe with a Ho-Chunk effigy mound, Hopinka reclaims the authority to tell the story of the tribe in its own terms. In addition, the film incorporates veiled images of powwow dances, invoking the spirit world, accompanied by sacred harp singing from the 19th century. In between this, there is footage of Diane Barnes during one of her readings in New York from the mid-90s. The film speaks about reincarnation within the Ho-Chunk cosmology, avoiding putting extractive information on display and evoking the contemporary indigenous experience of the powwow. Then you will see Finding Spells, which is from 2018, also a contemporary meditation about Ho-Chunk traditions of mythology that imagines a myth for the ayahuasca, also known as Indian pipe plant, that was used to both induce trance and also bring back those who fainted. Hopinka combines oversaturated images of landscape with abstract images incorporating text on a screen and music. You will also see two other films, J.G. Approx from 2015 and Kicking the Clouds, his most recent work from 2021, that explored Hopinka's personal relationship with members of his family. These films combine personal audio recordings with images of traveling between Wisconsin, the Southern California, and Washington, spaces that he calls home. Both of these films reflect on larger questions of indigenous identity through space, language, and intergenerational familial relations. Sky proposes an understanding of indigeneity that is hybrid and in transit without an attachment to land, as it has been traditionally defined. Home is a personal sense of culture, community, and identity that is mobile and is fluid and not necessarily attached to the ancestral land. It is a sense of belonging that is intimate and yet historical and contemporary. You will also see Dislocation Blues from 2017, which is a film that puts into question, that puts the community at the center, imagining a multivocal space that also requires more than one viewing position. It is a personal account of the Dakota Access Pipeline, the DAPL protest that took place in between 2016 and 2017. Instead of addressing the political urgency of the protest, Hopinka focuses on the personal processing of these events that happened during and after the protest. By approaching resistance indirectly, without disclosing emotionally intimate moments of those who were living at the camp or the violent moments of clash between authorities and protesters, and by limiting the story to only two voices, Hopinka eliminates the presumptions of totality given in mainstream media. We won't know everything about Standing Rock, but for sure we will hear an incomplete reflection and memory of the people that were there. Hopinka's practice shifts indigenous positionality from the object of intellectual extraction to the basis for an argument that challenges the assumptions of historical colonialism and its temporality. His work moves away from all destructive documentary practices as it shifts the discussion from conversations about the relationship between truth and authenticity to considerations of the social and material conditions that shape and are shaped by the production of documentary as a cultural image, as a cultural object. And I will argue also in relation to media mainstream overall. By carefully observing ancestral landscapes, moving through them, and engaging with those who inhabit them, Hopinka develops a poetic visual language comprised of references to the personal, the symbolical, and the symbolic and the historical. At the core of his work is an understanding of place and belonging through community that goes beyond limiting indigenous culture to ancestral lands. These films are a form of political affirmation of contemporary indigeneity that also offer a space of encounter and inquiry for the non-indigenous. Thank you so much. I hope you really enjoyed the program.